Okay, well, good evening. Good evening, everybody. I'm really delighted that we have such great turnout for this career forum. My name is Susan Schneider, and I'm the William H. Enfield Professor of Law at the University of Arkansas School of Law. And it's my privilege to serve as the director of our LL.M program in agricultural and food law. We have a part-time and a full-time LL.M program offering advanced studies of all of the laws affecting our food system. And we have people both on campus and by distance. We're very proud to sponsor this event with the Food Law Student Network. Caitlin, could you introduce yourself and the network before we get started?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I'm a 3L student at the University of Maryland, and I'm one of the co-career chairs for the National Food Law Student Network, which is a national network of students all around the country who are interested in food, law, and policy. And we do a variety of things. We do webinars like this. Last year, there was a large symposium that was held. We released a newsletter that has relevant news articles and career opportunities. And it's basically just a network that helps students from around the country with the similar interests connect with professionals in the field and with one another. And at some point, we'll drop in the chat a link for people to go to the website or to register with the newsletter if they're interested, but that's the network.
Excellent. Yeah, and you do great work. So you can be very, very proud to serve as a leader in the network. A little bit about the format before we get started. We'd like everybody in the audience to please, except our speakers, to please mute your microphones. We will have Q&A, and we'd like you to submit your questions via chat. We're going to have I'll be introducing our speakers in just a minute. We're delighted to have a wonderful panel of speakers. They'll each speak for about 10 minutes, provide a little bit of an introduction for us, and then we'll just move into Q&A. As you probably heard at the very beginning, the meeting will be recorded. We're going to be posting it on our YouTube channel, and Caitlin, if you folks would like to post it as well. And after the meeting, we will do a follow-up email that provides you with some contact information, some additional resources, and a link to that YouTube posting. Okay, I would also like to introduce everybody to Emily Bridges. I can safely say that we would not have been able to pull this off, I don't think, without Emily's expert help. Emily is my colleague at the University of Arkansas School of Law, and she's also an alum of our program. So we're just delighted to have her with us. Emily, what have I missed so far?
I think we're ready to go. We are recording this event, and Andy is having a little bit of trouble signing in, so he will hopefully be here soon, and
Okay.
I'm going to email him and try to help him get in.
Okay.
But I think we can go ahead and get started.
Excellent. And I'm glad we have our first cat in attendance. That's always fun.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll start and I'll introduce Amanda and Sarah first, and we'll hope we get Andy with us. Amanda Hitt is the director of the Food Integrity Campaign. She's been a champion and a visionary for protecting and empowering food system whistleblowers for over a decade. She's the founder and director of the Food Integrity Campaign of the Government Accountability Project, and she's also currently a visiting scholar at Harvard Law School. Amanda's clients have included USDA food safety inspectors in ultra-high-speed slaughterhouses, contract poultry farmers faced with exploitative contracts and company retaliation, and animal researchers privy to taxpayer-funded waste and cruelty. In addition to litigating these important whistleblower cases, Amanda and her team work to draw public attention to the whistleblower stories and to turn their revelations into food system and legal reforms. Amanda's clients come from varied economic sectors and backgrounds, from factory workers to CEOs. Through assisting her clients, Amanda has learned firsthand the importance of bringing diverse voices together to create meaningful change. That's a great story of inspiration for all of us to get started. Amanda, thank you for your work, and thanks for being with us. I'm also delighted to have with us and to introduce Sarah Mackey-Barr, who's Deputy Director of the Federal Trade Commission, Office of Policy and Planning. FTC does such important work throughout our food system, and we're delighted to have Sarah with us representing the FTC. She joined the Federal Trade Commission in 2002, and while at FTC, she has worked in numerous positions, including Chief of Staff to the Chairman, Attorney Advisor, and within the Office of General Counsel. So great agency experience for us. Before joining the FTC, she was an associate at Jones Day and worked as a judicial law clerk for the Honorable Richard S. Arnold. So thank you so much for being with us, Sarah. Your contribution is going to be just so important to our students.
Thank you.
And do I see that Andy joined us? Welcome, Andy. I'm so glad you were able to get in.
Thank you. Apologies for technical challenges. I'm here.
That's okay. We're so far so good. We've got everybody on, and everything seems to be working. So that's success in my book. Andy Green is the Senior Advisor at the USDA for Fair and Competitive Markets. He coordinates USDA's competition and market regulatory policy. He leads the department's execution of President Biden's executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. This includes spearheading the modernization of the Packers and Stockyards Act rules to promote fair and competitive markets in livestock and poultry. Prior to USDA, Andy was the Managing Director of Economic Policy and then a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, where he managed an economic policy team that covered macroeconomic policy, budget and tax law, trade, financial markets, labor, infrastructure, and more. He authored reports on financial regulation, trade policy, antitrust and agricultural policy, and middle-class economics. He previously served as counsel to the Commissioner of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and before that, he was counsel to U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. He was staff director of the U.S. Senate Banking Committee's Subcommittee on Economic Policy and participated in the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010 and was the lead staff member for the passage of the prohibition on high-risk trades by banks that was named after Fed Chairman Paul Volcker. And Andy began his career practicing corporate securities law and has now found his way to agriculture at the USDA and antitrust and competition in that capacity. So, wow, what great experience, Andy. We're just delighted. And I was going to say, Andy is the sort of the spearhead of reaching out to us and working with us to try to help to train and to inspire law students all over the country that this is important work, that we need more attorneys working in this area.
Thanks so much.
So with that, we're going to start out with having each of our very distinguished speakers just give us a little bit of an introduction. They've got about 10 minutes, and then we'll move to Q&A after that. So, Andy, do you want to start us off?
I'd be happy to, but I'm also happy to go last. But I'll start us off. Thank you so much, Professor Schneider. It's really an honor to be here with you, and thank you so much for the University of Arkansas program, Food and Agricultural Law, to host us tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about what we do, what we're doing here at USDA, what we are looking for, and the types of opportunities that are here, and just the overall type of work that needs to be done, and that we believe that y'all can play a role in supporting. So the competition and the challenges of concentrated markets are not new challenges, as those of you who are in food and agriculture know very, very well, undoubtedly. But they have become more pronounced over time, and they're particularly pronounced. They became particularly pronounced during the COVID pandemic, when we all saw how supply chains were squeezed, how large concentrated entities at the center of these supply chains, caused bottlenecks that saw the prices of the products, whether it's cattle and hogs or really even grains and other markets collapse, while the prices for consumers on the shelves really went through the roof. And it became very clear that we needed to do a lot to address those competition problems, so that we can't have that type of risk and type of concentration and really a threat to our food supply. But we also have seen over the years, and my colleagues on this panel have many of whom have worked on these challenges, many concerns about the way that farmers, producers are treated by the larger market entities, complaints of retaliation, complaints of discrimination, complaints of not being able to access markets, complaints of investing heavily to build a farm or to do produce livestock or poultry to certain specs, and then terminated without an ability to recoup. A whole range of these types of concerns that get to the nature and design of our markets, the accountability in the markets, and the need to make sure that there are rules and regulations in place and enforcement, so that there's a bit better balance of economic power in the marketplace between, again, small number of concentrated food processors and large numbers of farmers, or in many cases also obviously large numbers of consumers. So in July 2021, the Biden-Harris administration put out the executive order on promoting competition in America's economy, had 72 different actions across the federal government. A number of them were here in food and agriculture. And that's what I've been working on day and night and weekends for the past 2.5 years to execute on. And it's really exciting because it highlights, again, the executive order competition is it's really different than anything we've done before, because it says that across the federal government, there are a range of regulatory steps that different agencies can take within the scope of their authority that can change the landscape in favor of competition, in favor of fairness for consumers, for workers, for farmers. And together with the antitrust agencies, the DOJ, the FTC, that can move the ball, that can turn the ship on how the economy creates opportunity, creates fairness, creates transparency for all the folks that I mentioned: consumers, workers, farmers, etc., all of us. Here in agriculture, we are again taking a novel approach. Again, Secretary Vilsack has been at this for a while and has been working on a number of efforts over many years to bring better competition, better fairness, better transparency to the market. We have had the opportunity over the last 2.5 years, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, thanks to the Executive Order on Competition, to do some really novel things. So we're deploying, you might call it, every tool in the toolkit. If we're going to do a whole of government effort on competition, we're doing a whole of USDA effort on competition. What does that mean? It means we're taking the investment authorities that we have and were granted by the American Rescue Plan to put more than $1 billion into new meat and poultry processing capacity, so that we're actually supporting the expansion, the stand-up of smaller and mid-sized meat and poultry processors to be able to provide us another option for producers in their local community. We're doing nearly the same thing in fertilizer, with $900 million of new investment in new domestic, American-made, sustainable fertilizer capacity. And we're doing those investments in other places as well, supporting transition to organic, so that farmers can, hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to make that the bridge over into organic. So fiscal authorities. The second set of authorities we're using are the regulatory authorities. Professor Schneider mentioned them. Packers and stockers, this 100-year-old law. Happy to talk more about it in a couple of minutes. 100-year-old law that we are revitalizing by saying, hey, the regs haven't kept pace. They basically, the enforcement really died off in the 80s and some in the 90s, but particularly the 2000s just cratered. Variety of reasons, but we haven't kept pace with the challenges. And so that means we've done things like propose a whole new suite of transparency rules for poultry growers, propose rules to prohibit retaliation, discrimination, other forms of deception. We have more coming. Rules to make sure that competition and fairness in livestock and poultry, which is what Packers and Stockyards does. It's like a mini Sherman and Clayton and FTC Act, and probably a little bit more because it includes things like market manipulation in livestock and poultry markets. Again, I'm a securities lawyer. How did I get into this? In many ways, cattle and livestock are original stores of wealth going way, way back in human history. So our second area is regulation, and the third area you might call it aligning USDA programs with fairness and competition. So that's doing things like making sure product of USA, our labels on meat, are transparent and accurate, so that when somebody goes to buy beef in the grocery store and it says product of USA, that it matches what consumers think they're getting with respect to the product there. Is it just sliced in the US, or is the actual beef that you're buying born, raised, slaughtered, and processed? We have an ongoing rulemaking on that question. And then several other things we're doing to, again, align our programs with competition. To do all those things, we need really smart, really engaged lawyers who care about competition, who care about agriculture, and who care in many cases about, everybody cares about it, but like there's a large application of administrative law, strategies around contract law and business business financing questions, all the financial regulatory work that I used to work on. There's a whole suite of things that occurs at USDA that we want to make sure that folks are aware of, and if the opportunities are the right ones, it's the kind of thing where you know who to talk to and can think, hey, there's something interesting at USDA because we're trying to do some interesting things. Last thing I'll say before I'll stop and turn over to my next colleague, I have two more things I want to say. One is we're also doing an incredibly exciting set of work around seed competition to try to link the patent office with the work we're doing at USDA to bring farmers' voices, transparency, maybe access to research germplasm, make those connections so the farmers have more and better choices in seeds. Again, very exciting. Last thing I'll say is just for my own journey, I'm happy to again talk about this more. It's really been an honor and privilege to work with my colleagues at USDA. We're just filled with wonderful, wonderful, smart, energetic, hardworking, upstanding colleagues who are trying to do the right thing every single day. And so it's a great work environment across the country. And I'm privileged as a political appointee to be able to work with wonderful, wonderful career staff. So thank you. And I turn it over to my next panelist and happy to answer questions. Professor Schneider, I think you're on mute still.
I had to be the first person to do that, huh? Just picking up on what Andy was saying about USDA positions, we've had a number of our LLMs over the years that have taken legal specialist positions and really had wonderful career opportunities. And so remember, for students, when you're looking for jobs too, these attorney jobs are not necessarily all in OGC. They're throughout the department doing really interesting legal work in other ways. So
absolutely. Our OGC team, our Office of General Counsel team, they are the attorney advisors, and we need them every single day. We also have so many policy staff where smart application of legal principles and skills and policy insights are absolutely critical. And they're not all named attorney advisors. In fact, most of them are not. Policy analysts, sometimes you can't tell from the federal application,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the roles that we could play tonight is to help
But
decipher
boy,
that.
thinking like a lawyer really helps in those positions.
It's critical.
Okay, well let's turn to Amanda. You can talk a little bit about the other side of the story in terms of advocacy in the from the private sector.
Well, I appreciate this so much, Professor Schneider, and thank you, Emily Bridges, as well for inviting me here. It's really exciting. It's also very exciting to follow Andy because he set me up. He was saying, at USDA we receive all of these complaints, and I couldn't help but think he was talking directly to me. Amanda, are you the reason I'm here because of all your complaining? And so, as Andy mentioned, he's an SEC lawyer that found himself in this space, and I'm a whistleblower lawyer who found myself in this space as well, and very happily so. So, I guess just by way of what it is that I do, as mentioned at the top, I work for an organization called Government Accountability Project, which is a transparency and accountability organization founded in 1977 with a mission to protect whistleblowers, and in doing so, we do some element of litigation support as well as policy education and information sharing and media outreach as well on behalf of our whistleblower clients who come to us. But regarding the food and agriculture side, I entered into the space originally started at Government Accountability Project in 2008 as a public health associate. I have a degree in law. I'm an attorney, but I also have a master's in public health. So I have a strong interest in the disease model and the systems approach. So you'll see that throughout the work that I do at Food Integrity Campaign. I originally started doing consumer protection work, and I certainly had a lot of interaction with the USDA. Not always positive, but always a challenge. And I can't say enough about the rank and file and the great folks at USDA. There's a lot of really good people trying to do a lot and doing so in incredible ways. I've, as a watchdog organization, however, the goal isn't always to give flowers, but sometimes give critique. And so there's definitely been times where we've helped USDA find its direction. I think that's the most democratic way, or diplomatic rather way of saying it. But also challenges with other agencies as well. Anybody in an LL.M program regarding food will tell you there's so many agencies that are in and around the food regulatory space and have a say. Certainly FDA has been, and FDA whistleblowers and USDA whistleblowers predominantly, but we've had a few from other agencies as well. Regarding the NPH and the public health approach that I've taken with the work that I do, well, at first, the clients, the docket that I inherited in 2008 were largely, food safety related. What I started to notice is that we were getting clients that didn't fit nicely into our programmatic area. And they were blowing the whistle, let's say, on worker safety violations at processing plants. We also started receiving environmental concerns as well from people who were impacted by pollutants coming from food and agriculture sector. And then we received a handful of animal welfare whistleblowers as well. And it was when I discovered that there was more to food and ag than just food safety, is when I set about to create the Food Integrity Campaign, and have been doing so since. And as again mentioned, I'm now at Harvard, looking back at my career and my time working with whistleblowers in food and ag, and their incredible impact that they've had on organizing around issue areas and building up that policy reform that ultimately leads to successful litigation. There's the one individual, so I'll give you a very brief example of a USDA whistleblower, was a former Food Safety Inspection Service whistleblower who had been raising concerns about high line speeds in poultry. And she was able to speak to every aspect of every issue area, not just the line speeds, but problems in immigration, problems with environmental waste and pollutants. Certainly spoke to poor animal welfare concerns, and ultimately to the food safety concerns that she had with the high-speed slaughter proposal at the time. So very interesting to see how one individual and their powerful narrative can galvanize so many diverse groups. And I've had the pleasure of working with the USDA under the Biden administration, and they're really fantastic and amazing work. And certainly Andy has been my contact there with regard to creating more fairness, accountability, and transparency within packers and stockyards. So I've worked with several of the farmers who have given voice to concerns regarding unchecked concentration in broiler production and within the production contract space. And it's been really amazing to have it preceded me by a decade, but my first contract broiler producer was in 2014, the client named Craig Watt. And to see so much being done is very heartening and it's a very exciting time to be in this space. And it's amazing that I'm in it. I have danced around, the antitrust area, but certainly corporate responsibility and accountability has been a key to, or at the heart of a lot of my work and advocacy. So I'm eager to talk about any and all of that, but also just really to share that the nonprofit space is not really where you think your head goes with antitrust, but corporate accountability is long overdue. And I do think that working to promote the narratives of working people is an incredibly important tool. And it helps regulators like USDA fully understand the import of what they're doing and the need to have effective and effective and ultimately successful enforcement of the existing laws, rules, and regulations. So that's what I do. I complain to Andy and other regulators on behalf of so many people who are deserving of their work over there at the agencies.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. That's interesting and again inspiring. And I think it's important in particular too for students to understand that sometimes private advocacy is necessary in order to force the government to do what maybe a lot of people within the government would like to do, but either providing information or providing that extra push, or even sometimes through litigation. We're not always dealing in an adversarial system where people, sometimes you just need a little help from the side.
Can I agree with that very vigorously, Professor Schneider? Because I think that's such an important point that, when I was a lawyer or in law school or whatnot, I don't think I certainly appreciated at all just how important the partnership between government and those outside of government are, or how important that partnership is. In many ways, I think one imagines that government is this all-knowing, bureaucracy that knows everything, and at the end of the day, it's people, and certainly there's some data collection systems that make things different, but people on the ground make such an enormous difference in helping us understand what's really going on, helping us understand legal interpretations of hey, you should think about this law differently. You should enforce it in this way. You should do a regulation in this way. And certainly we want to hear from all sides. We talk to folks in industry. We talk, we talk to advocates. We talk to all sorts of different folks to get range of perspectives. But it's such an important partnership between those on the inside and those on the outside. Again, sharp legal skills are so helpful in being able to come to us with a thoughtful analysis of why something's a violation or why we should do something differently or whatnot. And then we can say, oh yeah, there's a credible pathway forward, or at least have a conversation around how to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very, very well put. Well, now let's jump over and talk a little bit with Sarah about the FTC. We had one of our alums was so excited to take a position with FTC as a litigator in Ohio, and that was our first FTC appointment, and we were happy for her, and it gave me a good window into some of the amazing work that involves food and agriculture at FTC. So
Yeah.
could you give us a little bit of our introduction now?
Sure. And actually, I guess I didn't directly come to the FTC, but I am a University of Arkansas at Fayetteville Law School graduate.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, so I think that's kind of why I was one of the ones who got tagged from the FTC to talk today. But yeah, I graduated in '93. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
But it was an impressive LL.M program then and now. So it's a pleasure to come back and talk. Kind of wish I were, in the Ozarks with you, but it's good to be home.
Well, you're welcome to come back home anytime.
Thank you. But yeah, so it is interesting, and I love the FTC. I've been here since 2002, and so unlike Andy, I'm not a political person. I didn't grow up within the FTC, but I have been here long enough that I consider myself like a career civil servant, which is a great role, whether it's in the USDA or FTC or any of the agencies that encompass the government, because you really do get to have a huge impact on what you're doing. At least I think we do. And it's great that right now all the agencies are trying to really work together to improve and use competition law in a way that maybe they haven't been doing in the past. So it's great hearing Andy promote competition law, because that is one of the primary areas of what the FTC deals with. We have three main bureaus, and that's the Bureau of Competition, the Bureau of Consumer Protection, and the Bureau of Economics, which supports the two bureaus. And so we are an agency that's primarily made up of lawyers, 2/3 lawyer. Well, break it down big picture, 2/3 lawyer, 1/3 economist. And then of course you've got all the people who help us do the work we do. But so it is a great place. And I've actually, I know within my office, we have one person, Randy Stutz, who works frequently with Andy on the Packard Stockyard work to make sure that when we're thinking about competition, the way the FTC and the DOJ may be thinking about it and the way we've litigated it in the past is being thought about in the other agencies too, so that we're not creating a conflict, but we're working in tandem. So that's really a great opportunity, I think. So some of the areas where I would say that the FTC's work has reached a little bit into agriculture and maybe is reaching more, we've gotten involved in right to repair laws. We are promoting it, looking at it. And as far as farmers go, that's often with your tractor, getting it fixed. Because as we all know, farmers want to be able just to fix their gear. They don't want to have to take it to John Deere to have a computer software run it. And so we're trying to figure out ways to improve, to think about right to repair and the copyright information that the John Deere company may have, or whichever. Not picking out any bad entity, just saying, here's one example. So right to repair is an area where the federal government's beginning to reach in, but also you had the states doing a lot of right to repair legislation. And so we sometimes come in with what we call technical advice, like how to help draft the legislation in a way that creates some consistency, which is really, I think, cool work. In my office, we do a lot of policy work. And with the Biden administration, we're doing some really creative policy and creative work right now that affects competition, and I would say workers across the United States, which means we are impacting agricultural workers as well. One of the primary things that my office is working on is we recently, in January, the FTC proposed a non-compete rule. So basically, we have proposed a rule that would ban non-compete agreements across the country. So we have taken about 20,000 comments, and we are working on drafting to a potential final rule, and that will be up to the commission. But basically, we have used empirical research and other research, mostly empirical research, to look at how non-compete agreements affect worker mobility, affect innovation, affect competition, keep wages lower for workers, and particularly for people of color and women have usually a higher pay gap, partly because of these non-compete clauses. And for low wage workers, I mean, in the past, we thought that non-compete agreements are primarily for the CEOs, the CFOs, the really high wage workers who maybe negotiate it, have counsel representing them. But in the last 20 or so years, there's been a lot of studies, and we have found that non-compete agreements affect at least 33% of people with no college degree. And we are talking about, baristas and farm workers and wrestlers. And, it is interesting when we look at the comments from whom we've received their stories about non-compete agreements, how they really impacted them. And it is hairdressers who can't then go open another hairdressing. So it is an interesting and really broad and creative thing that the FTC is doing right now with this non-compete proposed rule. And as Andy said, to do rules, to do regulations, you got to have a lot of creative people. You got to have a lot of deep thinking, because the FTC has not done a competition-based rule in decades. And so we are in some ways creating a new path. And that requires also really good admin lawyers. It requires really good legal counsel. It requires us to think about preemption, because some states have laws relating to non-competes and some don't. And trying to take all those and think about the best way it can work for a uniform rule across the nation. We're going to get challenged on this, and we know that. The Chamber of Commerce has already said we hate this idea. Non-competes are great because, we train people and they need to stay with us. But we see it as more of a limitation on workers being able to go out and find better jobs or negotiate for better pay, or, not being able to get out of a harassing situation. So that's one of the huge things that I'm involved in almost every day, because we're trying to get this regulation done, a potential one, as soon as we can. And then, some of the other things that I've worked on within the FTC in the policy world, we're working on a report right now relating to the supply chain and what happened during the pandemic. We're hoping to get that released pretty soon. We looked at infant formula and what happened when we had that huge drop in infant formula, and how the marketplace responded, and how some of the FDA regulations impact new infant formula creators coming in. But, you also have to make sure that infants and toddlers are protected. And so looking at that and trying to figure out whether or not we have any role there. And then as far as the competition working with, and the agencies working together, it's really interesting, because and this really has more to do with health law, which I think is fascinating. Hospitals in certain states can merge, even if they may be almost close to a merger to monopoly, sometimes without review by either DOJ or FTC, because what they enter with a state agreement is what's called a certificate of public advantage, a COPA. And basically the state says, yeah, we'll review this merger of hospitals and make sure they're not raising prices too much, which is hard to judge, keeping, access to rural care. And sometimes these mergers happen because they're getting money from the FHA, but we're not hearing about it until the state's already agreed to it. So we're trying to work with the FHA to say, hey, if you're doing this loan and we think it may have a bad impact on competition, can we at least talk before that happens? So it's really cool that there's more interagency discourses happening right now. It's a really exciting time, I think, to work in the government. So I highly promote it. I'm happy to answer any questions. I could go on and on and on, but we have a limited time and I think I've used my 10 minutes. So I'm going to be quiet now.
Wow, that is so interesting, Sarah. Thank you. And again, inspiring for government work as well. So, well, I think we're going to move to some questions now for our audience. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. Emily is going to be monitoring those for us. And otherwise, Caitlin, I think, is going to start us out with some questions from the Food Law Student Network.
Yeah, sure. So we worked together and compiled some questions, and you all kind of talked sort of about some of them and about some different things. And I think you all did a good job of talking about your respective organizations at like a very high level. And like you gave some good examples, some projects you work on. But do you think that each of you could get maybe like a little bit more granular and talk about like what your day-to-day work is, like, or week-to-week work is? Like, I think before coming to law school, and people who aren't in law school, like they have this conception that like lawyers are arguing in front of judges and like that's what they do. And I'm not an attorney yet, but my experience, I have never stepped foot in a courtroom. I've never had to do that yet. And I do so much other stuff in my internships. And so like, what's the actual kind of like day-to-day tasks and projects look like for all of you? I guess maybe we can start with Andy because you started first last time. If that helps.
I'm happy to go. That's a great question. And I have to look back at the day-to-day of the different law jobs that I've had. I've never been a litigator, so I've never gone to court. I worked in the summer for litigators, so, prepping legal briefs and whatnot. But my current job is different than my lawyer job, but similar to my job on the Hill. So let me describe a little bit. But the day-to-day of what I'm doing both here and then I worked before in the Senate, it is like a legal day condensed into sometimes 15-minute or 30-minute increments. So both this job and my Senate job, but this is the one that you're particularly interested in. Because I'm a political, I go from briefing the secretary and writing a memo describing, excuse me, I'm on a call. Can you, my kids, out you go. No. Okay, thank you. I go from briefing the secretary and doing a memo that describes what we're doing, what the key questions are, to working with the other political colleagues to understand what the concerns are, things we have to work through, and then all the way back down to drafting outlines of a regulation, drafting sometimes reg text, sometimes drafting the actual preamble of a regulation itself. So it's a really varied day. I'll take meetings from the outside all the time, such as with Amanda and others. I'll have to testify on the Hill. So there's a political is a very broad sweep. But when I think about what my career colleagues do, it is similar to that, often in 30-minute or 1-hour increments of meetings to work through this, and then drafting whatever the legal document is needed to reflect the policy decision. Again, regulation is the one that we are spending the most time on, but it could be other types of legal documentation, a subpoena to make sure somebody's presenting documents. All those things occur and have a back and forth between the policy side and the legal side. Both of us get to have, I sit on the policy side, our general counsel team sits on the legal side. Both of us need to have a keen eye to what we want to achieve. from that combination of law and policy. I'm happy to go into greater detail, but maybe that gives you a flavor.
Yeah, I think that was good. And in the interest of letting everyone answer the question. Amanda, do you want to go next?
Sure. My day, I think as I think about the work that I do, I feel a little more like an investigator than an attorney most of the time. I don't think there's any shortage of strange calls that come into an organization that protects whistleblowers. I mean, a lot of people ask about that. Like, don't you get a lot of just random and ridiculous phone calls? And the answer is yeah. People find the website, and some people have um, absolutely valid claims, and some are a little bit out there, and then some that are really out there turn out to be absolutely valid. And so we approach every single intake and call for assistance with professionalism and an open mind, which that process makes sure that justice is done and in an equitable fashion, but it also takes up a lot of time. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but people who are in difficult employment situations, like let's say a whistleblower, tend to be heavily traumatized by the experience, especially it kind of knowing a little bit about a background about whistleblowing. Most, if not the large, overwhelming 80% of all whistleblowers report within their chain of command long before they go to Congress, long before they go to the media. So by the time they get to us, usually it's in my case, especially in the food and ag sector, I've noticed that they originally came up through their chain of command with a concern that they thought that their supervisor was going to see as incredibly valid and give them a high five and a pat on the back and say, "Great job, you've uncovered fraud." Turns out that that is not the way that most whistleblowing goes. The areas that that most classically we look at are waste, fraud, abuse of power, threats to public health, and in the food and ag sector, it's threats to public health. So whether they're government or private employees, corporate employees, a lot of times they've seen something that breaks the regs and violates those regulations, and they know they're as whistleblowers they're the first to know when they've seen something wrong. We were talking about Andy's time in the SEC. I think most people would say they don't know anything about securities, and you would need a whistleblower in the inside to let you know if there was a problem there. Well, let me tell you something about food and ag. You don't know nothing about farming until you've sat down with hours with a farmer to hear what they're seeing and what they're doing. And so a lot of my time is learning that trade. Wow, I don't know if you're aware of this, FTC and USDA, but you all sure do use a lot of acronyms. I spend a lot of my time just figuring out your acronyms so that I can speak to people who are impacted by those acronyms. So it's a lot of study, a lot of research, a lot of completely fish out of water experiences that I have to school up on. And then after all of that, our methodology is once we do accept a client, whether that's for litigation purposes or policy or media support, we then marry those people with existing advocacy groups. So a lot of my time is spent in coalition work. I mean, a lot, because you have to build out those networks so that when whistleblowers come forward, you can upset the power dynamic, right? So it's a David and Goliath scenario. So the goal is to surround that whistleblower with solidarity and support systems and policy movers, and that means nonprofit advocates a lot of times. It also means universities like yours, building those networks with professors and people who are really schooled in on the issue areas. So I do a lot more thinking about the law and the political ramifications of pursuing litigation in a certain area than I do litigating. So that's really good. The way our organization is set up, because of the nature, the time commitments and how much you have to work toward deadlines. We do separate those roles, although it's small, it's nonprofit, so we're always blending in together, having meetings of the minds, and then going back out into the political arena. So yeah, it's a busy day, but it's a lot of learning. I mean, I know more about broiler production and swine than I thought I ever would. But I also know a great deal about spinach and soft rot and E. coli. So I'm learning every day and learning through the best teachers, which are those on the front lines.
So I guess I should jump in. I got out of litigation a long time ago. It was not, we were not a good fit. So I jumped into policy work. And so I'll kind of talk about my current day-to-day, although it's changed throughout the FTC. So in the role of deputy director, today I got to have the fun of digging in deep and trying to figure out what our best definition of worker employer should be for the non-compete rule. And I got to tell you, there are lots of ways to draft those definitions, and just really trying to tease out every loophole that any definition might create and how it could be used or how not to be used. So, you know, that is kind of a fun, I think it was an 1.5 or 2 hour meeting. Then I got to jump to a brown bag kind of with the California state legislators and their staff to talk about non-competes and kind of talk to them, even though they've had a non-compete law on the books, I think since 1872. You know, they are continuing to try to refine their law. And it was really nice to have that opportunity to talk to them and talk about the empirical studies we have. Within the last week, I had to give all my staff their annual reviews. So I had been drafting that for a while, and last week was some of the oral reviews, because once you get into management, it's not just about being a lawyer. It's also about making sure that you know, people know where they're succeeding and know where they can improve, or if they're on a path that's really bad, you know, try to give them an opportunity to right themselves. So, you know, that's important too. Then I've dug a little bit into the FTC yesterday, filed a comment with the Copyright Office relating to artificial intelligence and creatives. And so it was our staff doing that. So I got to dig into the comment that the FTC wrote and review it and talk with our lawyers in the Office of Policy Planning, as well as we often talk to the greater FTC to make sure that we are not saying something that competes with whatever the Bureau of Consumer Protection or the Bureau of Competition is doing. And sometimes I feel like I'm just doing administrative work. To get that comment letter through the commission, you got to go through a circulation process. And it's not fun, but these are part of being a lawyer in the government. But, you know, you really understand what you're doing when you do that too. And then, you know, sometimes we have the fun of putting together a conference and hearing from people, whether it's, we've had conferences related just to having workers come talk to us. And then we sometimes have conferences relating, you know, that we have academics and other attorneys, so we can figure out and fine tune some of the areas of law that we're interested in. Plus we have these big studies that I haven't even gotten into, but that, you know, so my day-to-day jumps around from administrative work to mentoring work to supervisory work to digging into legal issues on any given day.
Okay.
Wow. Such interesting jobs. Caitlin, I think some folks might have to leave at 7. And some people can stay and continue visiting with us. Sarah, I think you need to leave. Did you have any final comments that you want to leave us with? I can't believe it's 5 to 7 already. This has gone so quickly.
I know. I hate that I have another commitment. I must admit it's a family commitment because we're reaching on to 8 o'clock on the East Coast side. So, but you know, I just think this is a great program, the LL.M program, you know, working with USDA. They're doing really great work these days. I love working for the government. I will say that as you're thinking about joining the government, the pay scale is interesting. It's a little less maybe than what you might make somewhere else, but you do get to wear what I consider a white hat. Sometimes if you can work in the private sector a little bit, a couple of years, you can come in at a higher pay scale than you would if you come directly out of law school or directly out of an LLM. And so those are kind of things to think about. Because if you start in as a GS11 or a GS12, and I'm sorry, this is government talk, but it's where it ranks you on the whole pay scale and steps and ladders. It takes a lot longer to get higher into the government pay scale. So it's just something to maybe talk to your career advisors about, or you can reach out to me and I can kind of explain. I don't want to dig too deep, but it is something to think about when you think about your long-term projection as far as working in the government. But I really thank you for inviting me, giving me this opportunity. It's been lovely, and hearing all the great work that Amanda's doing. It's great for me to learn from her. And Andy and I have been in a couple of meetings, and it's always a pleasure to see you, Andy. So thanks, everybody. It's been great. I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Take care.
So, Caitlin, do you want to continue with questions, or we don't? I don't think we have anything in the chat, do we, Emily?
We have, I can see at least one in the meeting chat.
We do have a couple questions in the
Oh,
chat
okay.
that I can ask. Okay. First question is for Andy. To what extent is giving exemptions for some USDA requirements like GAP and GHP to small food businesses realistic? And could giving those exemptions aid in antitrust initiatives in that they promote competition?
So I don't have a specific answer to that question, but let me offer a few thoughts to maybe you all can help answer that question, and y'all can send us a letter and advocate for the pathway that makes sense. There is perennially a tension in regulation and other government intervention between the sort of the scale of the intervention and the scale of those who can bear the intervention. So it is commonly the case that more regulatory complexity does usually push towards more scale of the industry to deal with that regulation. Now the question is how much, and the other reality is that things like information technology, computer systems, data, whatnot, are incredibly powerful forces pushing towards scale and technology, or pushing towards scale and concentration, and commonly, I believe, outstrip regulatory interventions. But you're right to identify that there are probably some spaces that smaller actors wrestle with, and how do we get that right? And this is not just in regulation. I think this occurs, not just I think, we know this occurs even in the type of support that USDA tried to provide. It's one of the reasons why the Biden-Harris administration has created a new rural partners network, because we provide millions of dollars of housing and wastewater and other lending and support to rural communities. But sometimes the filling out the forms to apply for that is complex enough that really small rural communities that have, a volunteer mayor and maybe a part-time city manager doesn't have the time or capacity to do that, or even know that some of these programs exist. So we're creating a new network to support that. I guess my point is that we do have to think really creatively about how we balance genuine policy needs. You could get rid of the form, but then you'd have waste, fraud, and abuse, and money going to people's pockets. And you have to balance different policy priorities and figure out how to design regulation, support, et cetera, to try to do that. You're never going to get it perfectly, but it is absolutely the types of things that we, have our policy and legal staff thinking about on a day-to-day basis. And that's both from a policy design perspective, from a legal perspective. Sometimes we're doing a regulation and our regulation is saying something is unfair. Is it no longer unfair to a farmer because a small company does it versus a big company?
Mhm.
There's some balance. Yet we also recognize that we do want more smaller companies out there in the markets. How do we strike that right balance? I don't have the precise answer, but those are some of the things that I would encourage you to think about as you come up with an answer, and send me your law school note.
Thank you. That's great. I'll ask one more question from the audience and then turn it back over to you, Caitlin, okay? This is from Dylan, wondering what the path into this field looks like as a 3L student preparing to graduate. Does USDA hire fresh law school graduates, or is it necessary to gain experience elsewhere? Do you have any advice for someone leaning toward policy work?
Let me offer a few thoughts, and I certainly would welcome, obviously, Amanda and other panelists and Professor Schneider to weigh in. I think that Sarah is right, that having a couple years of experience outside of government is very helpful in government, in terms of pay scales, but even more importantly, in terms of actual just a little bit of worldly experience and dealing with different situations. And then when you get into government, there's the ability to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. And I think that's true very much on the legal side, but very true on the policy side, where you're having to make judgments, because we hear from advocates that claim the sky is falling all the time if you do X, Y, and Z. Sky's not going to fall most of the time, but sky might fall one time, so you have to know which one. Like, that's credible concern. That's not. The other thing I would say, however, is that there are some also wonderful training opportunities in government. Many folks start in our general counsel offices and then move over into the policy shops over time. Some of them come in with honors programs, et cetera, and sometimes they come in as presidential management fellows. There's just a range of different ways to come in. I don't think there's one perfect right answer. You've got to really listen to yourself. I certainly benefited from a couple of years of practicing law, but again, there's multiple ways to get in, and so I'll stop there.
I can
Yeah,
I can chime in. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Very, very briefly, no one really should listen to me. I'm the nonprofit person, so I clearly didn't identify with the wealth tracker, anyway, but I will say, when it comes to antitrust and competition and the nature of this conversation, and I'm sure most people would agree with me on this, that sometimes because it's such it was an area that was more or less neglected, especially during the time when I was in law school in the early 2000s. I think sometimes, I know that it's going to sound weird coming out of my mouth, but maybe getting some defense side time wouldn't be a bad idea. And I think there's a lot that you can learn from that as well. So, and the other thing I would point to anyone at a 3L that's looking to kind of enter this world is, don't forget state AGs. And I think Andy can speak to that. I only saw the press release, but I know that there's been an influx of money that's gone into looking at food antitrust things matters on a state level. So I think that it's not just USDA that can get you into these areas. So I just add that as food for thought.
Let me add one more thing, Amanda, that you point you made, maybe think of it, which is that some of these areas are also so heavily neglected that it almost doesn't exist on the outside. It's just a very rare opportunity, and I think it's great to go get defense experience, frankly, in any antitrust area, because then you've got a sort of a skill set that you can apply wherever. But it is absolutely, it's also the case that we at USDA are training people to do the work that we have to do. And in some cases, there just isn't external training. So my recommendation is, again, I'm absolutely in favor of getting experience outside, but I'm also cognizant that we have to do the work within USDA of being able to build a pipeline. And I want you to know that I want the folks on this call to know that we're doing that, and we hope that we will be able to do that successfully with new capacity, new interest, and the new work that we are doing to revitalize some of these areas.
That sort of touches on like the last question I was going to ask was I was going to group together the questions about like advice that you'd give to students. And the questions were like, was there any classes that you took in law school that were particularly helpful? What kind of skills are you looking, like maybe when you're interviewing someone, what kind of skills are you looking for on their resume? Like what can students be doing to like make themselves better applicants for these kinds of positions, other than maybe going and working somewhere for a few years, as you were just talking about, just sort of like build on the previous conversation?
Read books in the areas that you're interested in and be able to talk about ideas. I'm on the policy side, although I'm using legal skills every single day. So maybe there's a bit of a bias there, but being able to talk creatively about what's going on in the world and how would you use law to intervene to make things better in whatever challenge we're confronting, to me is the best advice I would be able to offer. And you probably, law students don't have necessarily time to read full-on books. So, it could be, read some law reviews or read, shorter articles in the Atlantic or Foreign Affairs or whatever it is. But I do think there is something very powerful about, the Meat Racket is a book by Christopher Leonard, a wonderful journalist, describing the challenges in this space. And when you read some of these deep looks at it, you really can start to deploy that. Hey, how would I change this industry? What tools would I apply? Would I apply transparency tools? Would I apply unfairness prohibitions? Would I apply break them up antitrust? Would I apply other things that are out there, etc.? So that would be my biggest recommendation for law students.
Again, following you, Andy. What am I supposed to say? Don't read books? Like, I mean, watch YouTube. I actually do have. I mean this. No cap, as they say. Like, I mean this. Like the University of Arkansas LL.M program, one of the best interviews I've ever had with a potential candidate, to to have identified through this LL.M program exactly what it is you're trying to do and try to accomplish, and what brought you into this secondary level of above and beyond the JD. Like what brought you in here and into the space and into a program, to me is a very compelling thing to see someone invest in learning more and understanding more as far as their education. So I will say that that the JD alone, it doesn't mean all that much. I mean, when you're first out of school, I mean, it kind of looks like standings and GPAs and law reviews and kind of a mishmash of things there. But for the folks that pursue LLMs or do joint programs, I think that's I think that is, and I think that if you're in this program, I think you're making great inroads. Or if you're pursuing the food law space rather than just generally going to law school and hoping to land a good job because you had a high GPA and you were on a law review. I think that specialization or it, not to specialize to the extent that you're no longer relevant, because I think that we've seen that needle go both directions, but to have to have read The Meat Racket and felt inspired enough to do something about it, or to have, and I, to have watched Food Inc. and said, I want to do this LLM program. I mean, I think it does give you a little, it certainly gives you an edge in that, in a sea of people with great GPAs, it does set you apart. And I think once you get into that interview, and I was joking at the beginning, but reading and knowing your stuff and having identified your place in the solution, I think is an incredibly powerful thing to have entering into any interview or any kind of attempt at entering into, whether it's private sector or government or nonprofit. It's important to have your story, and that's knowing the turf. So being well read is great, and but also advancing in an area and showing that extra oomph can go a long way.
Can I add also an additional tip, which is in government, the USA Jobs application process is complicated. And so my recommendation is that you, as a good lawyer, you will do this, but read those job descriptions, read the knowledge requirements very carefully, and make sure that your resume reflects all the skills, all the experience that you have that's relevant for whatever is being asked on the PD. Make sure that you are answering whatever questions are being asked to the fullest advocacy of your own experience. Because it's not going to be lawyers who will review your application on the first go around. It's HR staff. And they may not know exactly all the details of what you've actually done and why it really does meet the qualifications and the experience being asked. So don't be shy about advocating on your own behalf, and don't be shy about reading the job descriptions very carefully and using the language that's already posted to the fullest extent of reflecting your own experience. Mm-hmm. It's a little tricky thing hurdle you've got to jump through in this world.
Yeah, like AI is already doing that, like outside of USA Jobs. So it's like, they filter through your application, like look through certain words. So that's, I think, good advice outside of USA Jobs too. But I think that more or less we covered all the questions that I had prepared, and I don't know if anybody else has any questions or anything you want to discuss.
Well, I think this was just a fantastic session. I mean, hearing about such interesting jobs and such important work to do, it just couldn't have gone any better. So thank you so much. And I'm so glad we had so many students in attendance. As I mentioned, Emily and Caitlin and I will be following up to everybody. We've got your emails from registration, so we'll follow up with a link to the recording and any other resources that we can come up with that might be helpful. Some contact information. Amanda and Andy, if there are things that you can think of that we should link to or any other advice that we want to provide, let's use these contacts to really build this group.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, and thanks for taking part of your evening too. As Sarah pointed out, it's 8:15 there, and Andy, you've got some kids that I think would like a little bit of attention from Dad.
So they're very excited about the World Series. So they're telling me all about the World Series. Okay. I'm happy to be a resource. So feel free to be in touch with me directly and via University of Arkansas. Second base is stolen. Okay. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.